Sisterhood. Like my first book, The Help, I wrote the Calamity Club with the same intention in mind, and that is what happens when you put a group of scrappy, strong-willed women, all with a rich sense of humor, all at the very end of their rope, in a place as complicated and colorful as Mississippi. It's the Great Depression, and there's no one coming to save these women. No husbands, no fathers, certainly no government programs. And from this desperation is born a terrible, awful, but what ends up to be a very profitable idea for these women to make money. The story, The Calamity Club, is told through the eyes of an 11-year-old girl named Meg. She's an orphan living in Oxford, Mississippi, and partly because of her own sass, she finds herself unadoptable. She meets this woman named Bertie Calhoun, the other narrator in the book, and their fates intertwine during what is still considered the hardest time in American history. Meanwhile, Bertie Calhoun is getting a little sick and tired of being paid less than half of what the men around her are being paid. And from there, more prejudices start to build up. She learns that as a woman, she could be arrested just because someone thinks she looks a little promiscuous that day. And she could be declared insane for simply flirting with a person of color. And for that, they could take her children away and they could sterilize her without her consent, all so that more like her didn't populate the state. And everyone around Bertie seems to think this is just normal life. This is how the world should be, and no woman can or could or should try to change that. But what they soon find out is that they have sorely underestimated Bertie Calhoun. These two characters, Bertie and Meg, their two storylines, along with many of the women in the book, develop a sisterhood that is so strong. It's an alliance of trust. Sometimes it starts out with mistrust and grows throughout the story, but it really becomes the cornerstone of the Calamity Club. Underestimated. I like to write about what I call the underestimated woman. And she's the woman that, you pass on the street or in the grocery store and you don't think there's a whole lot going on inside of her. But the truth is, she is boiling to change her world. These characters in the Calamity Club and in The Help, and I think everything that I write was primarily inspired by people around me, and partly by my own mother, Ruth. She was one of the first in her social circle in Jackson, Mississippi in the 1970s to get a divorce. And she was part of this group of women's club, this club of women called the Junior League. And when she got a divorce, she was asked to step out. What my mom did, she had, a little bit of education. She had high school and maybe a little bit of college, but no official training. No one expected her to really do anything with her life. Everyone sort of said, oh, poor Ruth. And what she did was she sat down and she taught herself computer coding. And she wrote the first program in the state of Mississippi that tracked the immunizations of children. This program was so important. It was the first of its kind, and as it ended up, many other states in the United States adopted it. These underestimated women are exactly the kind of women that I like to write about. Wit. Life is funny, and I really don't know how any of us can get through the darkest periods of our lives without finding the humor in it. It's how I stay sane as a writer, as a mother, as someone from a place so full of both beauty and contradictions, as Mississippi and to work in the humor in the Calamity Club, which is often sardonic and sometimes a little bit vengeful. I like to ask myself, what is the worst thing that can happen to these characters? What are the worst things that could happen to Meg and to Bertie and to Frances and to Flossie and to Mrs. Heidelberg? Every character, I ask myself this question. And for the characters that I don't like, when I ask this often forms the bigger arc. In The Help, it was the chocolate pie or the toilets on the lawn. And in the Calamity Club, it's Bertie watching Frances being so petty, or Frances's face-to-face discussion with Flossie, which if you haven't read the book, you'll get to that. The answers that these characters come up with are so often, even in their darkest times, so funny. And I don't know where they come up with these answers. And usually I just let them do the talking because that's where the humor seems to come from. They tell me and I write it down. Secrets. The Calamity Club is full of secrets. When Bertie Calhoun arrives in Oxford, Mississippi to visit her sister and ask her sister for money, she finds out that her sister has not been entirely honest with her about their living situation. On the surface, it looks like they have the perfect home. Francis and Rory living, with his mother in this beautiful house on this beautiful piece of property, and they have plenty of money. But as the story unfolds, we find out that that's not exactly the case. And this level of, decorum in the South, especially in the 1930s, is something that I like to write about, because I like to write about characters that can, see through some of the bullshit, see through the faces that so many people put on every day to give the appearance that everything is just fine, when in fact they are absolutely not. There's some pretty interesting secrets about Frances's husband that we find out later on. And, the biggest secret of all is what this group of very entrepreneurial women come up with to get by and make a living. Honesty. Raising my daughter, Lila, I learned that a child will call it exactly like she sees it. Children so naturally see through hypocrisy and absurdities. And I wanted to give voice to that kind of innocent honesty. That's Meg. That's who she is. She's going to cut right through the bull and see the truth. And Bertie is the same way. She's inherently rational and straightforward, but she's also very kind-hearted. And she is exactly that underestimated woman that I'm always chasing to write about. When I'm choosing a voice and shaping a narrator, I like to write about one that can call out and see through these so-called absurdities and these rules that we're expected to follow in life, in polite society, in gender roles, in religion, in race, the contradictions of the Jim Crow laws in Mississippi. And in the Calamity Club, I figured, rather than try to draw this point out for hundreds of pages, I decided to just stick it in a sign on the wall on page 1 for Meg to wonder over and hope that the reader can appreciate the irony of that right away. Thank you to my French audience for joining me today. Thank you to my French publishers, and I hope that you enjoyed the Calamity Club.